House, vowing to defend President Trump's national emergency declaration to build a wall in Congress and in court. North Carolina officials launch a hearing to determine the fate of a congressional race left uncertain amid allegations of voter fraud. And the latest developments in the Jussie Smollett case as new questions arise about what really happened. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. President Trump spending President's Day in Florida, where he is set to make a speech this afternoon on the situation in Venezuela. Back in Washington, his administration is preparing to fight back against any challenges to his emergency declaration on Friday to free up $8 billion to use for border security.
What the president was saying is that, like past presidents, he could choose to ignore this crisis, choose to ignore this emergency, as others have, but that's not what he's going to do.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live on the North Lawn. As everyone waits for the president to come back, you've got the place to yourself. What are you finding out?
You know, it's awfully quiet around here. It almost feels like it might be a holiday, with the exception that it has been a very noisy day here in Washington, D.C. as part of a day of protest planned around the country against this emergency declaration. Just a short time ago, a big demonstration across the street from the White House in Lafayette Park. Members of the ACLU, MoveOn.org, protesting against the president's emergency declaration at the same time as legal challenges have been filed. Public Citizen already launched a lawsuit in district court in Washington, D.C. The ACLU and California Attorney General Javier Becerra and others planning on bringing lawsuits against the declaration. And then, when they get back from this week's recess, Democrats in Congress planning legislation to block the declaration. Listen to what Adam Schiff said yesterday.
This is the first time a president has tried to declare an emergency when Congress explicitly rejected funding for the particular project that the president is advocating.
Now, if Democrats in Congress do pass legislation trying to block the president's emergency declaration, White House officials said yesterday that the president may veto that. Here's the president's chief policy advisor, Stephen Miller, with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday.
Obviously, the president is going to protect his national emergency declaration, Chris. And I know that we're out of time, but again, I want to make this point. There's no threat.
So, yes, he will veto?
He's going to protect his national emergency declaration, guaranteed. This is a threat in our country, not overseas, not in Belarus, not in Zimbabwe, not in Afghanistan or Syria or Iraq, but right here. And if the president can't defend this country, then he cannot fulfill his constitutional oath of office.
So all the fire, Dana, is being aimed at this emergency declaration. But do not forget, the president can get an awful lot of money without this emergency declaration. He's got the $1.37 billion from Congress. He's got about $600 million in a Treasury Department forfeiture fund. He's got about $300 million currently in the Department of Defense's anti-narcotics program, and can transfer another $2.2 billion into that program. That's without even touching the emergency declaration. That unlocks the military construction. So the first pots of money that the president is going to tap, the Congress really can't say anything about it. But as he starts to transfer money in the DOD and then goes for the 2808 military construction money, that's when they'll make a lot of noise.
That's right. And tell me a little bit more, because I watched last night the Andrew McCabe interview on 60 Minutes, and I wonder if there's any reaction from the White House today.
Oh, yeah, there's plenty of reaction from the White House, and clearly they're not happy with the tale that Andrew McCabe is telling. And just to refresh everybody at home, McCabe told 60 Minutes that while he did not participate in active conversations about it, Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, did tell him that there was a move afoot at the Department of Justice to consider removing the president using the 25th Amendment. Listen to what McCabe said.
A discussion of the 25th Amendment was simply Rod raised the issue and discussed it with me in the context of thinking about how many other cabinet officials might support such an effort.
McCabe also said in that interview that Rod Rosenstein was serious about this idea that he might wear a wire to record the president. Rosenstein has previously said he was only joking about that. Both men attracting fire from President Trump this morning in a tweet saying, wow, so many lies by now disgraced acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He was fired for lying, and now his story gets even more deranged. He and Rod Rosenstein, who was hired by Jeff Sessions, another beauty, looked like they were planning a very illegal act and got caught. There's a lot of explaining to do to the millions of people who had just elected a president who they really like and who has done a great job for them with the military, vets, economy, and so much more. This was the illegal and treasonous insurance policy in full action. Mercedes Schlapp, who was on Fox News earlier today, said that McCabe has no credibility. He has lied on several occasions and that he is a partisan hack. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear the president say something about it in his address coming up in Miami a little later on this afternoon.
Right around 4 o'clock. All right. John Roberts, thank you. Democrats gearing up for 2020 are spending the long holiday weekend on the campaign trail. Right now, we're following Cory Booker and Kamala Harris in New Hampshire. Peter Doocy is live in Concord, New Hampshire. So what did Cory Booker tell you about paying for the Green New Deal just a little bit ago?
Dana, he suggested that it could basically pay for itself. I specifically asked him about an item in the Wall Street Journal today that in New York, just replacing light bulbs was costing about $2,000 per apartment. And this is what he told me.
But this is the lie that's going on right now. As a guy who's a former mayor, that shows you can actually revive your economy and create a bold green future. We environmentally retrofitted our buildings, saved taxpayers money, created jobs for our community, and lowered our carbon footprint. This lie that's being put out that somehow being green and responsible with the environment means you have to hurt the economy, a lie. And I can show you bold things we could be doing. In fact, the energy and the industry of the future, we can define the way and not let the Chinese do it or other countries do it. America's got to lead again. We can get a green future, an economically prosperous future that works for everybody.
And Booker drew big crowds at house parties all across New Hampshire for the last couple days, but most of his pitch is about unity in the face of division. Dana.
So the other candidate that's up there is Senator Kamala Harris. She's doing her first trip there. She's been down in South Carolina before, but how's it going in New Hampshire for her?
So far, so good. It seems like for her, she hasn't done anything except for sit down for lunch with Democratic Congresswoman Ann Kuster. Later on today, she's got a town hall in Portsmouth, but we were with her down in South Carolina when somebody asked her about how to pay for the very expensive provisions in the Green New Deal.
We have a tax bill that got passed that gave $1 trillion to the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America. And they need to give that money back.
So Harris and Booker both well received by Democrats so far in New Hampshire. But remember, this is a state that in 2016, Bernie Sanders, a Democratic socialist, won very easily. And he still has not yet made his intentions officially known. Dana.
All right, Peter Doocy, thank you. For more on that and on Bernie Sanders, Terry Holt, founder and partner at HDMK Strategic Communications, and Marianne Marsh, former senior advisor to John Kerry. Thank you both for joining us on President's Day, talking about presidential elections. Marianne, let me start with you. So, as Peter Doocy said, Bernie Sanders has not explicitly come out and said, I'm running, but we have indications that he is cutting a video, that his intentions are that he is going to run. One of the guys that you know comes on this show, Colin Reed, wrote this today at FoxNews.com about Bernie Sanders. Although his candidacy seems a foregone conclusion, it's also immaterial in many ways. If he decides that the rigors of another national campaign are not for him at 77 years old, his indelible imprint on national politics is not going away. Sanders has reset the foundation of a Democratic Party, ironic given his steadfast refusal to identify as a Democrat. So there they are up in New Hampshire already. Bernie Sanders probably going to make his way there. Marianne, your thoughts on his possible candidacy?
Well, so far, the announcement that he's cut a video has been met with a collective yawn pretty much by everybody on the Democratic side. And here's the reason. Bernie Sanders won't be the nominee in 2020, just like he wasn't the nominee in 2016, because he still has the same problems. He has problems with women voters and voters of color, and those problems have only gotten worse. And as you look at all the candidates who are getting into this race, most of them are better positioned with women voters and voters of color than Bernie Sanders. So he's trying to make up for that now, but it's too little too late. And they have too many other options. And Bernie Sanders, frankly, was not vetted in the 2016 campaign, as he has been since then. And that's the problem for Bernie Sanders.
What do you think of that? I see you nodding your head, Terry.
I think he's going to get consumed by his own creation. He's the Pied Piper of socialism in America. He's dragged the Democratic Party leftward in a dramatic way, but he's also left the stage open for a new crop of these so-called Democratic socialists, and they're going to dominate the Democratic primary this time around. And I don't see Bernie, unless he really surprises and wins New Hampshire well and then has enough money to compete in California. I think the generations have passed him.
That's all interesting. The other thing that I feel like we haven't focused enough on yet, and Marianne, I'll start with you to help explain this. I'm going to show you a map of Super Tuesday, which you might not be able to see, but it includes Alabama, California this time, Colorado, and other places that you would know that we're in Super Tuesday. But how big a deal is it that California has moved up its voting? How will that change things for the Democrats or even for the general?
It fundamentally changes the math that you need to become your party's nominee and win the general election and the Electoral College. And for Kamala Harris, this is the best thing that ever happened to her, frankly, because now it comes in March. California will be on Super Tuesday. It has more votes than almost all the other states combined, and Texas is on that day as well. When you look at that, it has 3 times more votes than Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. So what happens for Kamala Harris, even if she stumbles in these early contests in Iowa and New Hampshire, if she does well in South Carolina, then she picks up a good chunk of votes in California. That's where the math starts to be in her favor. It has a compounding effect. When other candidates start to fall behind in the delegate count, it's hard to catch up. And so she has an advantage there. She doesn't have the field to herself. There are other people from California running, and Elizabeth Warren's got a good foothold there too. But the more she picks up, and the fact that they're going to start their early voting before the Iowa caucuses, so they will be voting before the Iowa caucuses all the way through March 3rd. That is a big, big opportunity for her.
Yeah, and Terry, just from your perspective, I know you're a student of politics, you observe it all. Does it affect the Republicans in any way, this change?
Not really. I don't think that either party has done a particularly good job yet of making an argument to the middle and to the mainstream of America, a slightly center-right country still, I believe. But, you know, this front-loading of the primaries in the Democratic Party is really a phenomenal story, because it means that all this so-called grassroots, progressive energy in the party is going to be subsumed by a race that's essentially about money. If you can't win big in New Hampshire and then make your fate so that you can maybe compete in California, you're going to be lost in the dust. And that's going to be quite an irony for the party that sees itself as really the grassroots of liberal America.
But Marianne, let me give you the last word, because if you, as the Democrats, end up with a nominee that they know who it's going to be by early May of next year, does that help or hurt them as they are basically then in a general election against an incumbent president for the next 6 months?
You always want more time in a general election than less. It always helps. And so I think the fact that California's moved from June to March is certainly a big opportunity there. But here's where I disagree with Terry. Look at the crowds who are already turning out for all of these candidates in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in South Carolina, in Nevada, go on and on and on. I love the enthusiasm on the Democratic side. I love the grassroots organizing, and it's not going to happen on the Republican side.
All right. Well, Miami looks good on you, Marianne Marsh. Thanks for being here. Terry Holt, thank you as well.
Thanks.
Let me tell you a few reasons it's a better choice. You can earn a few degrees, you can gain a voice. You can work for the team, you can run a point. You can do 20 years and on your own.
So could this video be one way to get Generation Z to join the military? We'll explain. Plus, stunning admissions from former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe in a 60 Minutes interview.
Rod was concerned by his interactions with the president, who seemed to be very focused on firing the director.
Every story, every 15 minutes. Fox News Headlines 24/7, Channel 115.
Former FBI Acting Director Andrew McCabe saying, among other things, that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein was not joking when he suggested recording the president after the firing of James Comey. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has been covering the story from the beginning, and she has more for us now. Catherine?
Thanks, Danny. Good afternoon. McCabe's interview appears to conflict with closed-door, under-oath testimony from his close colleague, the Bureau's former general counsel. McCabe, who was selling a book, said Rosenstein talked openly about whether there was a majority in the cabinet to invoke the 25th.
That's correct. Counting votes or possible votes.
Did he assign specific votes to specific people?
No, not that I recall.
Based on his conversations with McCabe and McCabe's FBI lawyer Lisa Page, James Baker testified and he faced criminal penalties if he misleads investigators. The Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein's 25th Amendment efforts to remove the president, in fact, went further. Quote, I was being told by some combination of Andy McCabe and Lisa Page that in a conversation with the Deputy Attorney General, he had stated that this was what was related to me, that he had at least 2 members of the president's cabinet who were ready to support, I guess you would call it, an action under the 25th Amendment. All of this happened in May 2017 after the president fired FBI Director James Comey, McCabe's old boss. That left the FBI and DOJ in turmoil amid concerns that Comey's firing amounted to an effort by the president to desync the Russia case and obstruct justice.
The Deputy Attorney General offered to wear a wire into the White House. He said, I never get searched when I go into the White House. I could easily wear a recording device. They wouldn't know it was there.
The general counsel of the FBI and the leadership team you spoke with said what about this idea?
I think the general counsel had a heart attack. And when he got up off the floor, he said, that's a bridge too far. We're not there yet.
But Baker, who is the general counsel McCabe is referring to, told something else, to House investigators. Quote, my recollection is that there were discussions about it over a longer period than the course of one meeting, a couple of days, he testified. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has consistently disputed McCabe's allegations, and he's consistently refused to go to the Capitol Hill to clarify his statements about wearing a wire and the 25th Amendment. But that may be about to change, with the Republican chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee pledging hearings in the not-too-distant future about these discrepancies. And he's also indicated he may be willing to subpoena McCabe and Rosenstein as well, Dana.
Maybe Senator Lindsey Graham will make them appear together. All right, we'll be right back, Catherine. Thank you.
That would be good
TV. We'll be right back. New developments from Chicago attorneys for Empire star Jussie Smollett saying the actor will not sit with detectives for a follow-up interview today about his alleged attack. Police saying the investigation has shifted after they questioned then released 2 Nigerian brothers who showed up on surveillance video. Mike Tobin is live in Chicago with more on the deepening mystery. Or is it a mystery anymore, Mike?
Well, at the moment, I can tell you that Chicago police are really trying to ramp up the pressure on Smollett to come in for this follow-up interview. His PR and legal team didn't come right out and say no, but so far they've said not today. The big development was over the weekend when Chicago police said that Smollett is no longer considered a victim. Police stopped short of saying that he's a suspect involved in a hoax, and what police did say is that they've got new information and they want to bring Smollett in for more questioning. And that follows the detaining and interrogating of the Sundario brothers from Nigeria. Official sources say the 2 men cooperated. The anonymous police sources say that 2 men were paid by Smollett to stage the attack. They even rehearsed it. Police have things like a receipt for a rope that was allegedly put around Smollett's neck. The official sources say evidence developed through their interrogation was enough to let these persons of interest go.
Innocence prevailed, all right? My guys are walking home. They're not charged. They are not suspects in this case.
Did Jussie Smollett set this up?
You know, there's still a lot of moving parts to this.
Now, police are communicating today, but largely they're just repeating that they've got new information and they want to bring in Smollett for that follow-up interview.
All right, Mike
Dana.
Tobin, thank you. For more on all of this, let's bring in former Justice Department prosecutor Jim Trusty. He's also a partner at IFRA Law. So what could happen next? Is it possible that somebody who alleged that this crime had happened, said he was a victim, this is turning out the way it is, and then he never has to say anything else? He doesn't have to come back to talk to the cops?
Yeah, it's really kind of a perhaps anticlimactic ending in that sense, but he doesn't have to talk to the police. And right now, his lawyer is going to absolutely make sure that doesn't happen. I mean, it would be almost malpractice to let him go back in and talk to the police, because really the only thing he can do is put himself into lies or get himself formally charged by acknowledging that the whole thing was a lie. So there's no upside for him to go in.
Take a listen to his interview last week with Good Morning America host Robin Roberts.
What is it that has you so angry? Is it the attackers?
It's the attackers, but it's also the attacks. It's like, you know, at first it was a thing of like, listen, if I tell the truth, then that's it, because it's the truth. Then it became a thing of like, oh, how can you doubt that? Like, how do you not believe that? It's the truth.
So I wanted to ask you, because you're a former prosecutor, when you get a case like this, you get the initial information, how do you weigh care and compassion for a victim with a healthy dose of skepticism in case it turns out to be a false report?
Well, I mean, it's a tough question, and it's a case-by-case thing, but that is the ultimate goal. As a prosecutor, you're not a plaintiff's attorney. You're not there to just mindlessly or blindly accept something that comes in the door. So you talk to your detectives, you talk to your victim, you weigh all of that evidence to decide, is this person truly a victim? Is this person's story making sense? And maybe more importantly, do I have a reasonable doubt? If you're a prosecutor and you have a reasonable doubt about the case, then you should be done with the case. There's no notching of the belt. There's no glory, you know, to seeking convictions on innocent people. You should walk away. Now, this is further down the continuum. Now we're not talking about whether the prosecutor has a reasonable doubt about the attack. It's whether or not this whole thing was staged. And it seems to be flipping totally on its head into a potential prosecution of Mr. Smollett.
Well, and the other thing is the Chicago Police Department, it's not like they have unlimited resources to chase down false reports.
Well, that's really the, you know, kind of the worst part of this. You know, sometimes in false alarm cases, false claim cases, you have literal police resources or fire rescue resources going out. They dredge a lake for a missing child. But in this case, it's not so much that they're having to spend actual hardware dollars. It's because they're spending opportunity cost money. They're
time, resources.
Wasting days on this case rather than real crime.
Their brain power, all of that. All right, Jim Trusty, thank you.
All right, see you, Dana.
We were doing ours, it was we were campaigning for Republicans. I mean, and that person had voted straight Democrats. And I think you said y'all may have checked into that one to make sure that that ballot actually had been turned in.
Explosive allegations coming from a hearing in North Carolina to determine the outcome of a hotly disputed congressional race and amid claims of voter fraud. Plus, we'll tell you what's next for Venezuela as tons of humanitarian aid waits at the border. An election fraud scandal playing out in a hearing today in North Carolina, with the winner yet to be declared in the 9th Congressional District 3 months after the midterm elections. Garrett Tenney is live in Washington. Garrett, what kind of election fraud are we talking about here?
Well, Dana, North Carolina election officials say they've uncovered an absentee ballot scheme that may have tainted the outcome in the state's 9th district race. Unofficial results have shown Republican Mark Harris leading Democrat Dan McCready by 905 votes, but the state has refused to certify the results due to reports of irregularities in a couple of rural counties. Today, the State Board of Elections began laying out evidence from its 2-month-long investigation, which found that a political operative hired by the Republican candidate's campaign carried out a coordinated, unlawful, and substantially resourced absentee ballot scheme during the election.
McCoy Dallas hired workers that he paid in cash to collect absentee requests, to collect absentee ballots, and to falsify absentee ballot witness certifications. McCoy Dallas paid generally $150 per 50 absentee ballot request and $125 per 50 absentee ballots collected.
Investigators are also expected to share evidence related to the unusually high number of absentee ballots that were never returned by voters in a couple of rural counties. An elections expert from Harvard is expected to testify that ballots in those counties disappeared at a rate more than 2.5 times higher than the rest of the state. Dana?
So, Garrett, will the state have to redo this election all over again?
Yeah, well, that is certainly possible. Over the next couple of days, each side will have a chance to present evidence to the State Board of Elections, which is comprised of 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. At the end of those hearings, if at least 4 members of the board believe that voter fraud affected the outcome of the election, it could order a redo. If it doesn't believe the outcome was affected, it could certify Republican Mark Harris as the winner, but that would require votes from at least 3 members. If no decision is reached, under state law, Harris would be the winner, but Democrats control the House, and they have said they would not seat him if there are still questions about the election's fairness. If that's the case, the seat would be deemed vacant. Democratic Governor Roy Cooper could then call a new election, which wouldn't happen until later this year. Dana.
Okay, Garrett Tenney, thank you. Fox News Alert: President Trump is set to speak about 2 hours from now to the Venezuelan community in Miami, expected to once again call for disputed President Nicolas Maduro to step aside to make way for interim president and opposition leader Juan Guaido. Phil Keating joins me now from Miami. Phil.
Dana, President Trump and First Lady Melania are expected to soon depart West Palm Beach and fly down here in a helicopter. Then they'll get here to FIU and they'll meet with this crowd of invited and assembled Venezuelan Americans as well as immigrants to talk about increased pressure on the country of Venezuela, specifically the president. This morning, President Trump, for the third straight day, spent the morning at his Trump International Golf Club, apparently playing around today with Mick Mulvaney, his acting chief of staff. The focus here in Miami is more pressure on accused kleptocratic President Maduro to step down and let opposition leader Juan Guaido take over. Since Maduro became president, Venezuela's economy has exploded in inflation, up to 10 million% this year, according to the International Monetary Fund. Food is scarce, so is medicine. The average Venezuelan has lost 24 pounds, and people are dying because regular traditional medicines that are widely available in our country simply are not available. And 3 million people have fled the country, many walking across the bridge into Colombia with whatever they could carry. Over the weekend, Florida Senator Marco Rubio and Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart were on the Colombian-Venezuelan border, urging the Venezuela military and Maduro not to block shipments of aid and food, which have now started to arrive at the border.
The countries that support Maduro do not surprise us. All of them are corrupt, and none of them is a democracy. And many of them are owed billions of dollars that they want to get paid by the corrupt regime. In terms of the solution, there absolutely is a solution. It's a very simple solution. It's called free and fair elections.
Now, National Security Advisor John Bolton is also here. He just had a bit of an off-camera gaggle with reporters, and he said later this month, around February 24th, there's going to be a bunch of volunteers bringing in a whole lot of aid to the border of Venezuela, and he's hoping that it will get in. He says that will be a major test for the regime of Maduro and the support of Guaido. Dana?
All right, Phil Keating in Miami, thank you. For more on this, let's bring in Brett Bruen. He's former director of global engagement in the Obama White House and expert on all these issues. Could I have you take a listen to Lester Toledo? He is a representative of the opposition leader and what he was saying about this aid.
What will happen on that day when the doors will open on the border between Colombia and Venezuela, a few meters from here, will be the entry of not just humanitarian aid, not just medical supplies, not just food for our people who do not have it, but also the entry of freedom.
We're just a few days away, Brett, from this day that could be very critical in this situation.
Indeed, and what you're seeing from President Guaido is an effort not only to dare Maduro, but more importantly, those border guards to use force in keeping this aid out, in keeping the people of Venezuela from accessing it. So it's a very smart tactic. I think what is still an open question is whether or not those border guards are going to opt for freedom, opt for the future of Venezuela, or whether they will side with Maduro.
So can the president say anything today that would make them maybe change their minds about letting it in, or deciding to cooperate, or deciding to side with Guaido?
I think there are three things that the president can do. One, he ought to speak about significant American aid that will come should Maduro step aside. Secondly, he's got to lay out a plan for getting there. And lastly, I think it's important that he speak of inclusivity. This can't just be about socialists and capitalists. We need a future that's going to include those who for the last 2 decades have backed a socialist power in Venezuela. I
wanted you to take a quick listen to Congressman Ted Deutsch, a Democrat from Florida, about TPS and the Venezuelans.
We also have to prioritize extending temporary protected status for Venezuelans and accepting refugees and political asylum seekers. But this has been absent from the Trump administration's agenda. because, like with so many other things, the Trump administration's words don't match their action.
What do you think that the president's reaction could be to this call for temporary protected status for these Venezuelans?
Well, I think it's worth studying. But that being said, a more powerful step at this stage is providing those military officers, the soldiers, with status in Colombia, Brazil. That's an incentive that immediately can take effect. I think the TPS issue is one worth looking at, but that is a medium term, not an immediate term issue.
What about also, I heard that this Russian bank today basically blocked the payments from the Venezuelan oil company because they don't want to get caught up in American sanctions. Are the sanctions that the Trump administration has put forward having an effect?
They are, not just on Russia, but I think on a number of countries and companies. And we will see those effects start to bite in the coming days and weeks. That being said, as your reporter in Miami mentioned, Russia holds $45 billion in Venezuelan debt, and they've actually made pretty clear in the last few days that they expect to get paid. So one way or another, they're going to find a way to get that money. Maybe
a last thought from you about Senator Marco Rubio and other congressional members that he's with, taking the steps to go down there, to be visible. A good step for them?
It is. I think seeing American leadership, I'd like to see more Democrats down in Colombia so that we can really put this forward as a bipartisan issue, not just one on the Republican side. This, quite frankly, as I've told members of the Democratic Party, needs to be an issue that Democrats get behind. It's about supporting freedom and a humanitarian crisis in Venezuela.
And right here in our hemisphere, indeed.
Absolutely.
All right, Brett Bruen, thank you for being here today. All right, the Army is hoping this video will attract new recruits. We'll tell you what else they're trying to do to reach young people. And make sure you follow us on social media at the handles you see right there on the screen.
Shepard Smith on the Fox News deck. President Trump set to speak in Miami about the crisis in Venezuela. That's as thousands of people reportedly prepare to face off with soldiers ordered to stop them from getting the aid they desperately need. Live coverage of the speech on Fox News. Plus, how a single napkin may help put a killer away decades after the crime. That's top of the hour on Fox News. We'll see you then.
The Army making some changes when it comes to recruitment with new ways to reach young people that include using hip-hop and social media. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon. So, Jennifer, why does the Army need a new recruiting strategy? Had it gotten a little stale?
Well, in essence, Dana, because 70% of Americans age 18 to 24, the key target age for military recruiters, are not fit enough to serve in the U.S. military. And for the first time since 2005, the U.S. Army missed its recruiting goal in 2018. Most of those who did sign up came from the South and Midwest, not from urban coastal cities. So two young Army recruiters came up with this hip-hop video.
Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, earn more. Don't be a hostage to college, paying a mortgage, honor, integrity, personal courage, eating up beer like a bowl full of porridge. I'm above all, supporting and serving, I'm soaring. Confidence is pouring. The Army, king of the jungle, roaring.
The video is called Giving All I Got. They asked the Army to lift restrictions on using social media platforms. They started approaching gamers